The formation of Debby in the Gulf of Mexico is looking increasingly likely this afternoon, and good afternoon at that. This is your tropical weather update from 28storms.com on this Wednesday, June 20th. Starting off with the latest from the Hurricane Center, they are ever so gradually beginning to ramp up the wording in the tropical weather outlook, and they have upgraded the development chances over the next 48 hours from 10% to 20%. And depending on what things look like come Friday afternoon, they have tentatively scheduled a hurricane hunter to fly into an area of disturbed weather. And if you look at the coordinates, they expect this low pressure center to be somewhere near the central Gulf of Mexico by this time. Overall, I feel as though the Hurricane Center is on track with the idea that this is going to develop, but probably more so beyond 48 hours. As you can see, there's still a lot of convection across central and western Cuba, now extending even more into central and southern Florida, but it's going to take several more days for anything to organize into a bona fide tropical system. Turning to the water vapor, you still get the impression that the storm is being inhibited by a lot of westerly vertical wind shear, and we still have this upper level low over the eastern Gulf of Mexico, although it is advancing more toward the north. At this hour, it is presently situated just to the east of Pensacola, Florida, and over time, this upper level ridge, which is starting to become a little bit more prominent over Central America, is going to be allowed to advance more toward the north into the eastern Gulf, and that is when conditions could become more conducive for a formation of a tropical depression or tropical storm. If we zoom into the southeast Gulf of Mexico using the latest visible satellite animation, you can already get the picture that we are dealing with an area of broad cyclonic rotation, and you will start to see some of these little minor spin-ups, but this is little minor spin-ups within a much broader overall circulation, and it will still be several more days until we start to really key in on one specific area. Having said that, though, the main low-level vorticity max is passing through the Isle of Youth in western Cuba, and it is already spreading into the southeast Gulf of Mexico. Here's another look at the wind shear analysis, and the 40 to 50 knots of shear is going to keep the system in check for at least another 1 to 2 days, but that upper-level ridge is going to be moving in fairly soon. And here is the shear evolution forecast from the GFS model. Here's the westerly shear over the Gulf. But as we go into the next 2 to 3 days, you see the upper level ridge with the very light upper level winds moving into the southern Gulf north of the Yucatan Peninsula, and as we get into the day 4 and day 5 period, it is situated over the eastern Gulf. The following are the latest forecast charts from the ECMWF, and we are looking at two different parameters using these maps. One is the sea level pressure, and the second is the mid-level 500 millibar steering layer, and that is denoted by the colors that you see on this map. So as we go into the 48-hour forecast period, you can see that the European is showing a little bit of organization to the north of the Yucatan. It is lowering the surface pressures down to 1,005 millibars, and the first trough that we see is pushing its way through the Great Lakes, but the trough is going to be lifting out here by 72 hours. And earlier in the week, it looked as though this developing Central Plains ridge by the weekend time would allow this storm to get captured underneath it, and then the ridge would push it into Mexico or Texas. This is an option that is still definitely on the table, and all interests across the entire Gulf of Mexico need to be paying attention to the tropics over the next week. But as we see in day 4, and especially day 5, we're seeing another spoke of energy moving into the western side of the trough out of the Great Lakes, and even though this is a powerhouse ridge over the Central Plains, if this trough is equally as amplified, then it may still be able to pick up our developing tropical storm and shunt it toward the northeast into the state of Florida. And that is indeed what the model is presenting us with as we go into day 7 and day 8. We're actually talking about an upper end tropical storm or low end category 1 hurricane based on this latest model cycle. And even with that second trough coming in, it starts to lift out by day 8, so we're facing the same problem with the storm possibly being left behind. And if you take that scenario verbatim, then this could turn into a prolonged heavy rainfall event somewhere along the eastern seaboard. Interestingly enough, we already have flood watches in effect for portions of southeast Florida, and periodically heavy rain bands are already spreading into the Sunshine State. This is going to be something that all Floridians will have to pay attention to. This is the 5-day precipitation accumulation forecast from HPC, and they are already forecasting a lot of rainfall from Tampa southward, but you see that there is an 11-inch forecast maximum just off the coastline, and depending on what our Gulf of Mexico system does, that could easily be nudged more toward the west or potentially more toward the northeast into Florida. Moving on to the latest GFS forecast, it is in very close agreement with the latest run from the ECMWF. Nothing organizes too quickly, but as we go into the second half of the weekend into early next week, that is when we start to see our development in the Central Gulf, And as we push our way into days 5 and day 6, it is showing a landfall here somewhere near Tampa, Florida, but don't get caught up too much into the details as this is a very extended range forecast and this could still change quite a bit. Finally, this is the Canadian CMC forecast, and this is one of the reasons why we cannot completely dismiss the Texas scenario. As you can see, it's still developing the storm very nicely into an upper end tropical storm or low end hurricane, much like the European, but instead of taking this toward Florida, it is still gung-ho about the development and the track towards southern Texas. So please keep it tuned to 28storms.com as we iron out the details. We are becoming confident that development will occur, but there are still major questions as to what the potential track of it may be. So keep it tuned to the website for more video updates, along with our social media updates that are on Facebook and Twitter. And these are posted very frequently throughout the day and evening time, so you may want to subscribe to those channels. So that is all for now, and have a good afternoon.